Welcome to Prime Suspects. Alongside Adam Bjorn and Prime Sports co-founder Joe Brennan Jr., I'm your host, Matt Landis. Today's topics: the NFL schedule release, the unintended consequences of sportsbooks reporting suspicious bets, and the 7-year anniversary of the repeal of the federal ban on sports betting. Quick production note off the top, we're recording this episode the week before it's released to get ahead of some upcoming travel, so please pardon any potentially glaring omissions from our rundown, and if anything major comes up, we can cover it next week as warranted. Moving right along and kicking things off with the latest from inside Prime Sports. Adam, the NFL releasing its schedule tomorrow for those tuning into this episode on the day of its release, and for those of you catching this episode after the day of its release, odds are you can wager on almost every game of the season at certain books. So with that said, Adam, how is Prime preparing its NFL offerings in light of the NFL schedule release?
I mean, we've never really gone insane with games of the year and putting up every game for $15 and all that kind of things. We usually put up the first week with, I think, fair limits, and I don't expect anything to change this year. Once it comes out, there'll be a mad rush to be up first or any of this stuff. Any bets that you're taking between tomorrow and middle of August are not necessarily bets you really want to be taking anyway. So there's no rush in it. We'll get it up, put up some good limits, and then just let people tap away at it with all the news and injuries that they collect every day in between now and when it really matters.
And Joe, what's your point of view on the immediate and expansive betting options available at any books once the schedule gets released, and how fun this can be for casual bettors compared to the relative lack of substantial wagers available across the landscape, and what that means for more serious bettors and bookmakers?
It's a marketing endeavor. Yeah, it's another way of, what are we, like 2 weeks from the draft and rookie camps for this week? So we need something to bet on, right, for the NFL. So it's something to throw out there, but nobody's ever offered, actually, most sports books haven't offered any kind of substantial limits. I think, though, we can all remember good old Cantor, when the schedule would come out, they would line up every game, and I think they would take up to like 10 dimes a game, which might be one reason why Cantor's pushing up the daisies today, or a fond memory to some. But that's all it is. It's a marketing endeavor. If anybody's really trying to put their money to work, why would you bet an NFL side that won't occur for like another 5 months instead of, you've got playoff hockey, you got playoff basketball, you got golf coming up, you got the second leg of the Triple Crown. If you're putting your money to work, you're better and you're trying to do something more than just like, hang on to the football water wagon. I don't know why you would be betting these markets.
All right, well, from an anticipated lack of substantial bets to an unintended lack of suspicious bets being reported, our water cooler segment this week. Last Tuesday, a clip surfaced on the Twitter handle @FairPlayGov with former Integrity Compliance 360 CEO Matt Holt recalling a scenario where sportsbooks sent multiple reports of suspicious tennis bets, but when regulators considered removing affected tennis matches completely, books stopped reporting suspicious bets. For context, the clip was posted last week, but it came from an interview with Holt from the April 2nd episode of the Behind the Lines podcast. And Joe, to go ahead and quote your initial commentary in our Prime Suspect WhatsApp chat, must be nice to have a business where you can charge sportsbooks a fee, but require them to do all the work. Go ahead and elaborate on this and what you think Holt's anecdote says about the impact regulatory scrutiny has on sportsbooks.
So let me preface all this by saying, of course, we'd like to have integrity monitoring of the global sports betting marketplace. It's probably a good thing. Did I make that clear to any regulators or anybody out there who may be listening? Having said that, U.S. integrity, it's funny how they're always the guys who are out there in the news, we're monitoring this, we're doing that. They don't generate anything. They want us to send them our markets. They want to send our data. They want us to be on the lookout. They never say anything like, oh, well, hey, thank you, BetChris. Hey, thank you, Prime. Thank you, Circa, for ferreting this thing out. It's always like the intrepid Sherlock Holmeses over there at U.S. Integrity that seem to have ferreted something out. This is a really weird business. They've convinced regulators in a number of states that they should be a mandatory spend for us. We're a customer of theirs, so, we're paying it. But it is a very weird business model where they sit back, we pay them, 5 figures a year for them to send us homework assignments. Having said that, I really don't like the glib way in that Matt just threw that out there because it's not substantiated in any way. I don't know any sports book that's trying to put its thumb on the scale. Okay. And I talk to people. Adam talks to me. Let's put it this way. Regulators didn't need us and our reports to start looking at lower level tennis stuff and think about like, maybe this isn't a worthy thing to do. They don't need us to tell them that that has had match fixing problems for quite some time. So I really don't like the way that Matt threw that out and really kind of besmirched his clients, by the way, in that way. We take this seriously. We take it more seriously than he does because it's our money. It's our markets. If somebody is betting and they've got an edge or it's fixed or anything like that, guess whose money they take? Well, not mine. They're going to take Adam's. So that's just silly that he threw that out there. I'm sure he was, I don't know, maybe he was just having some fun and trying to be glib, but I thought it was a really irresponsible thing to say.
And Adam, to Joe's point, since this could be a type of scenario where bettors could be extracting money from you and your business, what do you make of the anecdote?
All right. So first of all, I see 360, which it is now, not US Integrity. And I'm not sure even Matt's still at the company, so I'm not sure if it is.
He's not.
There you go. I mean, he's right in the sense of books aren't interested in reporting this stuff. They do it because that's what they have to do under the regulatory watch, depending on which state they're in. But it's extra work. It's added, things to kind of, and it's giving other books information. Back in the day before there was monitoring existence, when you saw bets coming in and you knew that something was happening, you would take that information and you would bet it at every other sports book. And that's how the monitoring worked. The people that got the information made the most of it and took advantage of the other books. I understand now that that's, there is all these monitorings around the world and all this information and everything's sort of getting put in place. And it's to protect the reputation of the sports because ultimately it's the sports that get hurt and then sports betting gets hurt and it's a madness of vicious cycles of whatnot. When it comes to ITF, I couldn't give two shits if we offered it or not. It's definitely a sport that is not of that much interest. And most of the volume you get is not necessarily good volume. But that's just the way it is. I mean, yes, it's something that we should have. It's something that someone should be somewhat of a gatekeeper for it. But generally how regulators and the way this has been structured, where they force it down your throat, isn't necessarily going to help the process. They collect all the data. They see all the information coming in. As Matt gave an example of a UFC first round knockout, and they bet it everywhere else. And then there was that actual UFC example some months ago when I think it was a coach or something was sort of manipulating some fights or setting some stuff up or whatnot. And then it does lead to regulators wanting to ban a sport because they sort of see all this information or all these innuendos, whatnot. So having real data, they can make real decisions and have the faith and the basis that it is a real sport, it is protected, we're getting enough data to understand the results and things like that. So all in all, monitoring is one of those necessary evils, as long as the data is protected, because again, sportsbooks companies are sending their private data to a central entity, which if you have the back end dashboard of that stuff and you can see some of that information that is collected there, you can really take advantage of that for your business as well. And the way to sort of look at these sporting events and real-time information aspects of it. So it is what it is. It's been around for a very long time, having this information flow in. Now what they're trying to do is monetize the data and sort of use it in a protective nature. And I think generally they've done a good job. They've seen things that haven't become public. They've seen referees potentially manipulating some stuff on things that haven't become public. There is a lot of good work going on behind the scenes as well, ultimately with what they're doing with this data and this information that they're gathering.
From a water cooler worthy story that resurfaced last week to a watershed moment 7 years ago tomorrow, our look ahead segment this week exploring the future of sports betting in a post-PASPA world. On May 14th, 2018, the Supreme Court overturned the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, also known as PASPA. And Joe, as a driving force behind the repeal, and as you reflect on the milestone tomorrow represents, what would you say are some of the biggest things the industry has gotten right over the past 7 years? Some of the biggest things the industry has gotten wrong over the past 7 years? And what all that says about where the industry is heading?
I guess in some way, one thing that the industry has done is it's kind of defanged the image that particularly the leagues and law enforcement had created around sports betting, that it was just this really nefarious kind of activity with only the worst possible participants involved. And they've shown it for what it is. And frankly, like for me, who grew up in a city like Philadelphia where it was so commonplace and already known, and that is, it's a fairly commonplace activity. It's a recreational activity for most people. And so you see the Fan Kings guys, in some ways, they've really defanged it in the way it's marketed, the way it's presented and everything. It is what it is. So I think by demystifying it and defanging the myths around it, they've done a fairly good thing. Now, some might also say that that's, not necessarily the best thing because maybe people take it not seriously enough because of the money involved. But I would say between bringing things like the KYC, AML pieces to it, really when it comes to the payments part of it, being able to instantly deposit and more importantly, get instant payouts when they're willing to let the money go. Those are things that are real pluses that, the U.S. regulated industry has managed here.
When it comes to the other side of the coin, what stands out over these past 7 years?
I think the fact that they're the authors of their own backlash. The way that they took advantage of the vacuum of knowledge about sports betting in the early states and basically suckered the lawmakers into doing things like allowing them to write off the cost of their promotions, their bonus money, things like that, which really reduced the potential for the tax haul for the states. And then also it turned into a nightmare of people getting like loads and loads of free money to hook them onto the activity that kind of gave the maybe a little too free rolling, way of entering the marketplace and attracting people that maybe younger or people didn't have as much money. It's like, well, I can get into it anyway because of all this free money. I think maybe that's a net negative. And also because there is a dearth of experienced people, you have a lot of people that entered the industry. There's a lot of smart people who are brand new to the industry, but most people didn't know sports betting from social networking, from anything else. And there's been a lot of fakery in that. And I think it's affected the kind of the product, the way customers are treated, the way the customers are just acquired, redlined. And I think that's why you see now this huge media backlash against the industry is because of that. But the industry was the author of its own destruction in that regard.
And as we consider all of those pros and cons, if you could get one do-over from your long and winding quest to repeal PASPA, what would you do differently? And if you could only choose one thing on which to double down, what would that be?
One thing I'd do differently is have it last 3 years, as I originally told Mrs. Brennan how long it was going to take rather than the 10 years that it did. And the other thing is, and I've said this before, I'll say it again, and it'll probably put it in my obituary on my headstone. And that is, I would have taken the marketing aspect much more seriously, comprehensively. There was too much assumption on my part and, the people that all came together to work on this, that the marketing, the advertising for sports betting was going to be regulated the same way that marketing and advertising is regulated for the casino industry and for the lottery industry, which real tight controls on where you could see it, when you could see it, who could see it, those things. That all just went out the fucking window because these brands rolled in and convinced lawmakers and regulators that they needed to build a market overnight. The market was already there. That's why we did it. And so based on a falsehood, they were allowed to run wild. And I think that genie is going to be really tough to put back in the box now.
Adam, would love to get your perspective on all of this as well, based on what you've experienced over these last 7 years as both a bettor and a bookmaker with a global impact on sports betting. What do you think the next 7 years have in store for the regulated U.S. industry?
Probably a lot more iGaming as they're trying to get their revenue in. Necessarily, sports is a second thought, ultimately, in this journey that they do. I imagine in the next 7 years, you'll have Texas open up, you'll have California open up. Hopefully, Florida gets off its monopoly and expands a little bit. I presume all the states potentially will be open except maybe Utah. I think ultimately it was a good plan to regulate the unregulated. When I first moved over this side of the world, it was wherever their war was at that time, probably somewhere in Iraq or Kuwait or somewhere over that direction. It was sort of like, why aren't they taxing this sports betting and, making some money out of it and paying for what they need? It made sense. I mean, you grow up with this horse racing, sports betting, all those kind of things legal. It's just like anything else. Like, do it right, regulate it, tax it. Now, along the way, some of the states made some really bad decisions in letting the companies build their databases off the back of the tax dollar. I think they've woken up to that already and looking to make some alterations. But the one thing I will say is that the regulators in the US, the ones that I've dealt with, the ones I've had conversations with, they're there to learn. They're there with open minds, which doesn't exist around the world. It's not the common practice when it comes to regulators. And maybe they've been in it too long and sort of, set in their ways. But I think they'll work it out. They'll work out the different things along the way, definitely on the advertising side. I'm not too wrapped up in the responsible gaming aspect and where they go with that. Yes, I think put some monitoring in places, but I think that's more on the iGaming side than the sports betting. I think the sports betting gets the bad rap, but it'll continue to evolve. The offshore market has really been hit and hurt by the $10, $50, $100 better. They've all moved onshore. That was the goal. As they expand through those other states, you'll get the same kind of effect. So they've done a lot of good, and it'll grow, and it'll move forward. Ultimately, it should just become any other industry like anything else, where it's safe, you're protected as a consumer, you're betting with legitimate places, you're going to get paid at the end of the day, and that's ultimately what sports betting and gambling is. You want to be able to place your wager and know that on the other side, if you do win, which not many people do, that you get paid out in an efficient manner.
All right, well, it wouldn't be an episode of Prime Suspects without a jump ball question for you guys. Flutter reported earnings last week and noted FanDuel's structural hold is now 14.1%. And per Ryan Butler, at Butler Bets on Twitter, pre-PASPA repeal, Nevada's historic hold was around 5.6%. What do you guys make of that stat, and perhaps any indications as to what it could say about where we're headed?
I think that's the sad state of affairs. 14% is an atrocity on sports betting in the USA. Now, ultimately, they've come out and say they want to hold 30%, but I think it shows exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying to turn sports betting more into a lottery or more into iGaming, where they're gouging the players for as much money as possible. A very fair rate on that side of things would be anywhere between 8 and 12%, in my opinion, where players get to churn their money, enjoy their sports, all those kind of things. Ultimately, for me, that number going higher shows that the same game parlays and all the sort of circus bets or carnival bets, the terminology, is gouging the player behind the scenes where they can't see what that household is. You go to a casino or a slot machine, you generally know what the return to player is. 14% shows that behind the scenes at a FanDuel, etc., their takeout on some of these bet types are such atrocities that they're able to hold that kind of volume. Because while I think American bettors in general really suck and aren't good at what they do, they're not that bad. They should not be getting held that much against them.
He's not alone in that opinion. If you remember Jim Chanos, he was famously short on DraftKings. He thought sports betting was a terrible business, thought DraftKings was a terrible business. And then last fall, he just live on CNBC reversed himself and said exactly what Adam said. It's because American bettors seem to be stupid because they're choosing to bet into parlays instead of betting into single games. And because of that, he went from being, short on those guys, so he's going long on those guys. And I think I mentioned earlier, the lack of experience that we had in this market when it was legalized. And that extends also to the public markets, the investor side of things, where they suddenly, they were looking at the DraftKings and the FanDuel, these companies that they invested in. And there aren't very many public markets companies where you go to them and you say, you know what? We have a historical profit margin of 5% on our volume. Invest with us. That does not get anybody really excited in the public market. So I think it's a combination of the demand coming from the investor side, and then also it's a tacit admission, something that Adam would probably agree with. They're not very good bookmakers at the top end. So who would have thought, and I'm always incredulous about this, that when the U.S. opened up And people were talking about like, well, what's it going to turn into? And everybody was saying like, oh, in-game betting it's just going to take everything over. It's going to, who on earth would have put their money on like, this is going to become a parlay business, a product that's existed for over 2 millennia. And that was going to be the killer technology, the killer app in sports betting when FanDuel pushed their SGPs onto the marketplace. We're not there yet, and I'm not trying to cheerlead for this, but I do wonder if it's going to eventually have a deleterious effect on sports betting's popularity with the recreational player when they get bored of it and say like, you know what, I win so infrequently. On Adam's point, the return to player, the amount of money that's being returned to the player is so egregious right now. Eventually, could foresee a circumstance where people just said like, I don't like this anymore. And that will definitely have an effect on the bottom line for those companies.
And Joe, we'll keep the mic with you. The last word is yours. Maybe a bit of a brighter note on which we can wrap up this episode. Any final reflections or predictions as we approach what I think Captain Jack Andrews will refer to as tomorrow's 7-year past-paversary?
I can't believe how big it got so quickly. We're at 36 states now and the District of Columbia. I was surprised, always surprised, and just because of how much this was pushed back on by the leagues, who are now our partners, by the Justice Department and the government, who were not friendly to this, and how it seems like all of America, things that 17 years ago when we first started this, sports betting was considered the third rail when it came to talking about gambling and politics. And now it's so commonplace that you've already look at the Pandora's box it's unleashed. Now you got the Kalshis and the sweeps, and to go from that period of basically there was 2 types of sports betting, Vegas and then everything else, to where we're at today. It's really remarkable to see how it's grown in such a short period of time.
And on that note, we will bid the audience a fond farewell. Happy NFL schedule release day and past-paversary to those who celebrate, and enjoy the 2-for-1 holiday tomorrow. We know which one Joe's going to toast with the better bottle of Irish whiskey. Thanks as always for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Prime Suspects. Register for Prime Sports at primesports.com and download the Prime Sports app. You can follow us on Twitter at PrimeSuspects_, at Joe Brennan Jr., and at Adam Bjorn 2. You must be 21 or over to play on Prime Sports. Always bet responsibly and within your limits. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER.